Welcome to Built by a Boss. I'm your host, EVOLYN Brooks, journalist, award-winning producer, author, founder of In My Solitude LA. On this podcast, you'll hear unique origin stories, growth strategies, and meaningful insights from successful founders and entrepreneurs who are leading conscious businesses and creating groundbreaking careers with intention. On our show today, Petra Starke, the CEO of SweatNGlow, a new global hot yoga franchise. She started the business after surviving a scandal that rocked the yoga community around the world. The former senior legal advisor to the Obama administration and former president and CEO of Bikram Yoga is sharing her personal story and offering advice on how to pick up the pieces of your life after a crisis and rebrand your business. Thank you and enjoy the conversation. Well, welcome, Petra. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm very excited as well.
This podcast is all about women with unique origin stories and growth strategies, right? And you have one of the most rich stories. First of all, where you were born in the Czech Republic. You moved to the United States to attend law school, Georgetown University, graduated first in your class, a former Obama White House attorney turned CEO of Bikram Yoga, and now you're starting your own hot yoga business.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, but let's start at the beginning. So many twists and turns, and we'll get into some of the highs and lows, and we'll speak specifically about how to rebrand a business, kind of starting over after surviving a scandal. But first, tell me, what was your life like in the Czech Republic? How did you end up in Washington, D.C. in law school?
For me, the town where I was born has 30,000 inhabitants. Okay, 30,000 people live in this little tiny town called Kroměříž, which today none of my friends can pronounce. But I think what it really is, EVOLYN, is the fact that I really strongly believe in a power of visualization and power of manifestation. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that when I was a child growing up in this environment, but now that I'm into yoga and I'm much more in touch with spiritual world and mind-body connection, I probably now know what I had done since a little child, which was really dream where I want to be and figure out a way how I get there.
Right. And you were also extremely gifted athletically.
I was strong in math and science, and I was strong athletically. So usually kids are either like the nerds
mm-hmm. They're one
or the
other.
jock. And my entire life, I've always sort of been a person who has great wanderlusts and wants. I'm an only child, so I always had to work to have friends. I didn't have brother or sister to come home. In order to overcome that, I became very good at floating between different groups, socioeconomically or interest-wise or otherwise. And I probably one of my gifts really is connecting with people and yes. making friends.
You went to the Obama administration. You were recruited there. You served yes. as general counsel and senior advisor to the president. What was that like?
Working in the White House, it's just like the best job I've ever had. It's totally insane because I think of it as a bubble. You walk into the White House complex, the gates close, you have your ID, depending on, what kind of clearance you have, what kind of access you have. And I have an active top secret clearance, which means that I could walk anywhere in the White House, within reason. So you don't walk into their home, but generally you can walk around the residence sometimes late at night. It's kind of wow. like night at the museum, and you can see all those cool rooms that they use for ceremonies. But honestly, it's a very special place because, America is a very powerful country. So many people like me want to come here, immigrants, and we are the center of the world and the center of power of the world, arguably, is in the White House and in West Wing. And so when you experience it, you see shows on TV. Mm-hmm. And it looks so grand. And then you come in there and the West Wing is tiny, tiny little box. Most people have like a desk, like a cubicle. It's not like big grandiose offices. So a lot of people end up having an office in the old executive building where you can have gorgeous space with a fireplace and very dignified, or you're like the young motivated kid and you want to sit kind of in the huddle.
Right,
And
right.
so that's just kind of in terms of experience. But in terms of the work, like, you work very long hours. I had just had my son, so when I got the job offered, I was 8 months pregnant. And I remember, and it was around Christmas, it was actually December 3rd, and they either had a congressional Christmas party or something was going on. And in the West Wing lobby, there was John Boehner and Nancy Pelosi, and they had an exchange. I won't say more than that. And it was just so surreal. I was like, wow, I am sitting here in the West Wing, 8 months pregnant, in a suit that doesn't fit me. I feel like a whale. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get a job, because who in their right mind would hire this person when there are so many unknown. I ended up getting this job, and the deal that I made was that I would take whenever my son was born plus 6 weeks. Because what I also realized is, once you step into that environment of high energy, high power, high responsibility, lots of work, like, the days were from morning till midnight.
Mm,
And I did
yes.
like my hot yoga every day, and I tried to do some exercise. And I was pretty infamous because, like, my my husband is a retired NFL player, so he has the luxury of having a very flexible schedule. Like, he's never had like a 9 to 5 office job. And
Hmm.
we lived near the White House. We lived on 14th Street at 14th and Corcoran in DC. And so the White House complex only had one breastfeeding room when we talk about women issues. And you
Wow.
had to go in a log and sign up. And then he had to bring the child. The child doesn't have to get a clearance, but my husband would have to get a clearance to bring the child. Or people have to deal with pumping. And so what I used to do is, like, they would drive by and I would like run, jump in the car and breastfeed in the car. So then the Secret Service agents were always giving me like the look or the wink. But
That's
they were like, "Who is this
hysterical. Like
crazy
the
woman?"
visual is so funny.
So I'm like, if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna do it. And I don't think I care as much about what other people think, so long as I don't offend or hurt feelings. Like, those are my
Right.
principles.
So you're working at the White House, senior advisor. So I'm sure you're meeting with the president in the huddle. Now I also understand that you're teaching fitness classes to Congress. How did that work?
So basically, in the White House, we had a White House gym. Each of the buildings inside the White House complex, which is something that people may or may not know, has its gym. And there was a gym that had classes. And I decided that if I am going to really carve out this time, because there is always crisis, there is always a call, there is always a meeting. So I committed to teaching classes at the White House gym, spinning classes and yoga classes.
So did the president or first lady ever come to one of your classes?
I didn't have them in my classes because the building that I used to teach in, it's called the NEOB, the red building. So that's the new executive office building. So there is OMB, the Secret Service trains there. Like, it's a pretty serious gym.
Hmm.
So when they exercised, they had Cornelius, who is a personal trainer, and he was like training them, in their home essentially.
So now you're at the White House, you're a senior advisor, and then you discover Bikram yoga. How did that happen?
So I discovered Bikram yoga prior to the White House. I graduated from law school and I started working at a law firm called Melvin and Myers. It's a pretty big law firm
Mm-hmm.
with offices everywhere, LA based. But basically, during these crazy times, I was stressed out. I would eat at my desk. Then I would try to run so that I'm fit or thin or whatever you call it, and
Mm-hmm.
also for release. And so I ended up getting a lot of stress fractures, because if you sleep 4 hours, 5 hours, and you work long hours and you eat crap, you basically will hurt. yourself because the body doesn't have enough nutrition, it doesn't have enough rest, and a lot of other things. And so I ended up in one of those boots, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, man, how am I going to deal with my compulsive OCD exercise love? And so some of my friends had been going to this Bikram yoga, hot yoga, and it sounded so bizarre to me for 2 years. I'm like, no, thank you. I don't want to go somewhere where people are nearly naked. I don't want to go to a steam room and try to move. It sounded so bizarre. But with the boot, the only sort of like hardcore intense activity that my brain could conceive of was this crazy Bikram yoga. So I went to Bikram yoga. It was Thanksgiving. The class was so full. I got one of my friends, a guy, to come with me. I took the boot off and I did my first class with a stress
Wow.
fracture. And I have to tell you that the very first class is so hard and so grueling, and you sweat like a pig and you're dying. But when you walk out there, that's sort of how I started my brand. It's you sweat and then you glow. You glow. You feel like you got a facial. You feel like you got a massage. And even though in that first class or in some subsequent classes, you will feel like, I never want to go back. This is awful. I'm going to die. I hate it. I hate my life. When you walk out, you're like, oh my God, I feel so good. I want to do that again and again and again.
So explain also for people who may have never taken Bikram yoga. It's 26 postures. Kind of explain exactly what
Okay, in Bikram yoga is the following. You come to a class studio. The studio has heat and humidity, and there is an instructor, and the instructor gives you verbal commands. You follow the verbal commands. The instructor does not demonstrate the yoga poses, and the instructor takes you through one breathing exercises, these 26 postures. Each posture you do twice, except for one posture at the end, and then final breathing exercise to kind of detox at the end. And so this class is the same no matter where you go. I've done Bikram yoga in Tel Aviv in Hebrew. I've done Bikram yoga in Japanese in Tokyo. I've done Bikram yoga in Mexico in Spanish. Like everywhere you go, it's the same. The brilliancy of Bikram was that he really created the concept of hot yoga, and he created the concept of group yoga classes. Because if you go to India, you go to the guru, the yoga master, and it's basically like Ayurvedic physical therapy. Sort of, it's like our physical therapy. So
Mm-hmm.
you will go and you'll be like, oh, I have sciatic pain, or oh, I have a lower back pain. And the yoga guru will give you like 5 specific poses, and that's for you, and you do it on your own. There is not like a standardized class. And so the way whoever created it, probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago in India, they actually put the poses in a specific sequence so that you work your body from the top to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And the poses twist and release your internal organs. So basically, like you get fresh oxygenated blood kind of running and flushing your system.
Got it.
So it's a great product. Like people get really hooked on it. Most people lose about 15 pounds in the first 3 months if you come 3 to 4 times a week. People get seriously addicted to it, where they go like every day. Lots of people who are in recovery or from addiction come. People with mental problems come. It helps them because it's a little bit of a moving meditation. A lot of times people tell me like, oh my God, there's like all these nearly naked people and like perverts, and people are staring at you and mirrors. And I'm like, that's not so. When you are in there practicing, it's so hard that
You
you
don't have
never
time for
stare
that.
at your neighbor. Nobody
Listen,
looks at their neighbor.
I have done hot yoga. I did not have time to look at anybody's body. Trust me, it was so it was
You
so hard.
girlfriend. Nobody does. It's ridiculous when people say that. I'm like, no, you need to go and do it.
So now let me ask you this. So is SweatNGlow, is it based on the exact same postures, the exact same format as Bikram yoga, or have you tweaked it a little bit with your new company?
We have tweaked it and expanded it somewhat. So basically, SweatNGlow has its origin 100% in Bikram yoga in those 26 and 2 postures as a fundamental core class. But basically, Bikram focuses mostly on this dialogue, and that's his transcribed words that people in teacher training have to memorize. And he will get people from Japan who don't speak a word of English, but after the 9 weeks, they can spit out those words. So what we have done in terms of that classic 90-minute class, we call it SNG 90. Basically, we focus on really the teacher's understanding, not being like locked into words that don't mean anything, having compassion, helping the students. The Bikram classes were notoriously abusive. Like, I don't know if you've seen the Netflix documentary or anything else on Bikram, but he would call people fat, bitch, cow, pig, whatever, jiggle, jiggle, miss boobs, so there is no tolerance for that in our brand. It's very inclusive. It's tough. The practice itself is tough. You don't have to be mean to people. You should appreciate and praise them. That doesn't mean you necessarily have to give them false praise, but it can be tough in a tough love way, not in an abusive way.
So now you were at the White House, the Obama White House. You met Bikram, and then you went to work at Bikram Yoga. You were president and CEO.
That's true. And you know what? The cautionary tale there, I was like, this is too good to be true. My biggest passion is Bikram Yoga. I go to Bikram Yoga every day. If I don't go to Bikram Yoga, I become very irritable. I don't want to be that person, and so I really, really prioritized that in my life. And so for me, like being able to basically get a job as a CEO of a company that makes the product I love the most, it was just way too good to be true. And I also, from a selfish and a naive point of view, I was like, wow, I'm gonna work with this spiritual master. Like, I love this practice. How privileged am I to go from Barack Obama, very, very popular, beloved president, to this like guru. And in there is a cautionary tale, because when you connect your passion with your job, if something goes wrong,
Right.
you may lose both. You may lose both. And I found myself, there was a period of time when Bikram and I had a falling out towards the end, when I couldn't go to a Bikram yoga studio in LA or anywhere. So that was really devastating. And it took some soul searching and courage to return to what I loved so much, because it was also, it kind of destroyed my life.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading about it. And of course, the documentary's on Netflix. If anybody wants to kind of do a deep dive in terms of the charges, alleged sexual assault, rape charges, although there were 4 charges where they settled. But what was interesting is you weren't in the documentary, but you were actually working there when some of these things were happening. I saw this court document online, and it was just your point of view, everything that happened. And I just thought, like, wow, that had to be very difficult to run the company, have to deal with these allegations, knowing the founder, moved your life across the country, and now you have to basically leave, and then you have to figure out how to start your life over again and separate your passion from the person.
I will not lie, it was completely devastating, because my life has been an upward trajectory. I went from the tiny little village to the bigger town, to the capital, Prague. Then I traveled around Europe when I was modeling. Then I moved to the US, I moved to DC, and I was always going somewhere, and I knew where I was going. And so I felt like I'm going to be helping him to be this positive change in this amazing culture that gives people so much joy and pleasure and health and well-being and spiritual happiness. And then for me, like, imagine that I'm an immigrant. When I moved to DC, I had $200 in my pocket. I was insecure about my English. I graduated from business school. I came from a country nobody knows about. It was hard for me to get my first job, etc., etc. And I worked really hard and I built, not crazy wealth, but a good lifestyle that I was proud of. I'm glad that you're focusing on women in your podcast because I used to refuse gender differences. I used to say, I'm as good as a guy. My parents don't have a son. Well, I can win in sports. I can win in chess. I can do it all. I'm as good as a man. I may be as good or better as a man, but we are different. We are wired differently.
Right.
So when this happened to me, I felt shame, like somehow it's my fault. Somehow
Right.
I failed the community. I failed Bikram. Like, why does Bikram behave like this? Why, what is it about me that enabled this to happen? And then instead of reaching out, sending out my resumes, I was like hiding under a blanket and really like, everybody who knows me knows that I'm positive. Like, no matter what kind of a day I have, the people who interact with me, except for the very, very, very few closest, will never know I have a bad day. I didn't have the coping skills. And as women, I think it's true that we just process things differently. We're more compassionate. If something like that happens to a guy, he will say like, that guy is a jerk and let me go get another job or something, But I, as the woman, at least I can only speak for myself. Like, I took it all upon myself and I didn't have coping skills. I didn't know how to get myself out of that situation. That was hard.
So how did you do that? Because that's a big part of overcoming obstacles. Not only did you have to figure out how to get yourself out of the situation, you worked there. It doesn't necessarily mean that you knew everything that he was doing, but your reputation was tainted by it. And then you had to rebuild not just your life, but then to rebuild, start over, and start a business because you still love the product.
I think the first step was really to figure out and realize that I love the product so much that man is not going to take that away from me. But that did not come overnight. Like I said, it was probably took me 3 to 5 months, probably more like 5 months. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna walk into a Bikram studio, and when the owner comes and wants to know everything about it, when the people want to know, I'm like, I don't own that. I don't have to engage. Like, I just want to practice. Of course, I can never really just do that because I'm just so well known in that community. But it took a lot of, it was almost empowering when I overcame that. I'm like, no, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna enjoy it. I'm not gonna let him take my job, take my money, and also take my practice away. So
Right.
that was probably the first step. And then I kept thinking about these poor studio owners and studios, because, and even the practitioners, because at some point, Bikram was like the high point of yoga. Even though people used to call it the McDonald's of yoga, like people were proud to be doing Bikram yoga. Like, they loved it. It changed their life, and it was almost like a cult where people would be recruiting other people. You gotta go, you gotta experience it, blah blah blah. After he and I split up, it took like months for him to take me off the website. So I'm gone. He stops paying me. We end up in a lawsuit. And for a month, EVOLYN, I had to show up to the office every single day, like nothing happened, because my attorney said, listen, he has so many days to cure the breach, and um and basically you just have to show up because you don't want to be accused of a breach. Can you imagine showing up to that office every day for 30 days?
Wow.
That was like mental torture, and nobody except for his wife and our accountant slash bookkeeper slash HR person knew. And so I've gone through a lot of like trauma.
What type of self-care were you practicing? Yoga is self-care in and of itself, but emotionally, did you talk to anyone? Because you had to get yourself to a place where you're like, okay, you know what? I'm past this. Now I'm going to start my own business, and I'm going to go back to some of the studios that were under the Bikram banner and ask them to be a part of this new brand.
It was a real torture, and I got there more or less on my own because I am a product of a culture that basically is completely distant and not very warm. There is no word for, like, in Czech, like I love you, like you have like three different ways to say it, and it means different degrees, and you never say the strongest one, and you're always like tough facade. You don't cry, you don't let emotions in, you just like do your best and try to go somewhere.
Just tough it
So
out. Yep.
exactly. So and that's not a healthy way by any means. And so I tried to do it in my own head. I was lucky because at that time, one of my closest friends is a shrink, and we ended up spending a lot of time together. And I think, even though I wasn't seeing him as a shrink, he definitely helped me by talking it through. And but I also received so many calls and emails. Like when I started as a CEO of Bikram, it was the first time there was a woman, not a family member. Like in our office, the closest people all spoke Bengali or Hindu in front of all of these like Americans or whoever. And that wasn't even considered rude, they were like the inner circle. And so for the first time, especially with my background, people were like, wow, she's a woman, she's coming, she worked for Obama, she's gonna institute change.
By watching the documentary, we really got a chance to see his dark side, his issues. What responsibility can we take when we maybe give our power to a guru or to a teacher? Like, what responsibility do students have to take in a situation like this?
Well, it's really interesting because I feel this is very much current with the Me Too movement and what happened with Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and all of these people, because I think Bikram is so charismatic. And to the people, especially like the abuse, the alleged sexual assaults and everything happened in the context of teacher training, right? And so the aspiring teachers, they see him like he's the king, he's holding the keys to the kingdom. I have to please him. If I don't please him, I won't become a teacher, or I won't become a famous teacher, or I won't get to travel the world. And so people were looking the other way. They would say, oh, it's just Bikram. Ha ha ha, that's just Bikram. And so I think when we see this abuse of power, we have to call it what it is, and we have to hold people responsible, because it's so much easier to look the other way.
Right. Absolutely. Now, you have since gone on to start your own brand, but it's kind of built upon your connection to Bikram. So how have you rebranded? How did you come up with SweatNGlow? How did you walk into that first yoga studio and say, hey, join me?
The way I came up with that name is because I was depressed. I didn't know what to do with my life. And as you said, I am forever connected with Bikram. He will always be part of my legacy. I will be part of his legacy. For 2 years, we were inseparable. He rented a house 5 minutes from his, no boundaries, would show up to our house 1 a.m., 2 a.m., whenever he wanted. We've traveled the world together. We were at one point very close. Like first year, we were very close. And I coming from where I came from, I couldn't believe any of these allegations were true. It was just so surreal. Mm-hmm. And the first day I started at the office, EVOLYN, we go to a meeting and he says, go get the fat Chinese, go get this person and that person. And so we have this serious business meeting, and he has 3 women. One is massaging his head, one is massaging his thigh, and one is massaging his arms. And it was distracting like hell. I just kept thinking, like, I would like to see Barack Obama in the Oval. All those interns and stuff. No, I'm not going to single out interns, because interns are not allowed into Oval after Monica Lewinsky, but let's call them the helpers or assistants. Like, go and massage me and do this. Like, just not happening. And so I talked to him, and the first year I had his ear and he listened to me a lot. And I said, listen, this cannot be happening in the workplace. You cannot have this here, period. So what happened is he would invite the employees home. So nobody showed up at 8 a.m. because he would be keeping them up till 2, 3, 4, 5 watching Bollywood movies, and they had to massage him. And I'm like, I'm the CEO. Don't complain to me. You have to show up for work. That's between you and him. You have obligations to the company. And so the life there was just so surreal. And so for me, like, the way I came up with the name is like, I knew this is going to be somewhat of a Bikram legacy because I am the product of a Bikram legacy.
Right.
But I wanted a name that had nothing to do with Bikram, and I didn't want to spend like $100,000 for somebody's domain who is squatting on it. And so I was sitting with this talented like app developer techie kid in my office at home, and I was like, what do we call it? What do we call it? And I'm like, well, when you go to yoga, you sweat and then you glow. I'm like, what about sweat and glow? And he was like, you know what? I really love that name. And it was available. So that's how we came up with Sweat and Glow. And then with the studios, like, the studios actually kept reaching out to me after he and I split up. I always say we had a business divorce. So after our divorce,
Right.
but the studios basically across the board, once the scandal became public, started to experience 20 to 40% decline in revenues because, people, we are aware, we have Google, we have phones that we're staring at. Like, no young person, no women really will go and support that. Like, you vote with your dollars. You can spend your money in whichever way you want. And in America, there are so many yoga studios, so many fitness clubs, so many gyms.
Mm-hmm. And there were 800, like over 800 studios. So
that's right.
So that's a lot.
And those were licensed, And then we had probably another, I estimate that there was another 5,000 unlicensed.
How did you start the process of getting the studios?
So I knew, so nobody knows Bikram better. And that's kind of what I felt the documentaries to me, the Netflix doc, as well as even the podcast. Like, I did talk to Julia, but I didn't feel it was necessarily aligned with me just focusing on the positive and rebuilding. Like, I didn't want to revisit and be co-branded with Bikram, like Sweat and Glow is Sweat and Glow, Bikram's in the past. We evolved past that.
Right.
So I did not participate, but I would say I strategically picked studios that were leaders, studios that are very strong, that, like, for example, in Philadelphia, I have this guy, Joel Pierce. He started Bikram Yoga in Philadelphia. He's 65 years old, Hare Krishna. He has his beats. He is upbeat. Everybody in Philadelphia who's ever done hot yoga has crossed paths. No bullshit. Everything is like, he lives for that yoga and he will die for that yoga, And so I picked these key people. And really, I took their input. They shared with me like their P&Ls. They shared with me their pain points to see what Sweat and Glow can give them and bring them as a global brand. Because the truth is, the value of Bikram was in the name. It was like you had a name recognition and people would come. Like, people just panicked and they just changed their names. So if you call yourself Petra's Yoga or EVOLYN's Yoga, or some people called like themselves White Horse, I'm like, is that an equestrian place? Because I don't really see any connection to yoga in White Horse. So people would like just change their name in a panic. And then they got their friend to do their website. So they never even communicated. They are heated. And for me, like, I'm fine if the studios in the beginning are powered by Sweat and Glow versus taking the Sweat and Glow name, because Sweat and Glow signs costs this much money and blah, blah, blah. And like, people will come and they will change because they see the benefit of the name. Once you have a brand, that's a benefit. So it's much more productive to work on the substance than just the name change. Like, the name, so long as it's clear that it's part of Sweat and Glow, that's cool. Like, that's not a emotional issue for me. But the studio owners suffered so much in the studios, and that's part of the story that has never been told.
Some people are still on Team Bikram, and then other people don't want anything to do with the name. So there's still a lot of studios out there that carry the name Bikram Yoga, correct?
Exactly. And so part of the frustration is that, they will be called something else. They still have the Bikram sign because a new sign costs X amount of money, and they are powered by us. And like, that's my next goal, is like to clean all that up so it's all very standardized. And now basically we're also opening new places and new studios that are just full sweat and glow, built to specs from the beginning. It was important for me to get that critical mass and build a community, because to me yoga is about community.
So are you training your own teachers now under Sweat and Glow?
Some of the studios that I picked were people who already started their local teacher trainings, and this year in 2020 we want to have our first centralized teacher training.
What is your goal with Sweat and Glow? Do you want to be as big as Bikram?
I want to make the yoga accessible to as many people as possible, which is probably the same as a big community, because basically to me, like, it's about overcoming the negative stigma of Bikram, really, because like the practice is magical, it's healing, and many people will reject it just because of all of these bad, the bad publicity, bad press, bad acts, all the stuff. So they will reject it, and then they won't get to experience it, and that won't transform their lives. And I feel like my mission and my passion is really to help people tap into the best version of themselves. And because of that, I am very, very proud that I am starting to work with the Blue Star Families, which is the official 501c3 of the US military. And I worked on that like for 8 months. I'm trying to really marry this experience of high level, high power Washington politics with yoga. It's about policy changes. And I want to be at the table when government makes decisions about healthcare coverage, about programs that are available. And I want to make sure that basically almost like legitimizes yoga.
What advice would you offer to other entrepreneurs? Because you're bound to, at some point in your business, hit some type of bump in the road, some type of nick to your image, or something may happen with the founder or an employee or something. What do you think is key to dealing with these type of challenges in the public with social media? What advice would you give for moving through that experience and coming out on the other side?
The key lesson that I learned from my own mistakes is like, you are never alone. You're never going to get through it alone, and you're not alone. We're not islands. We are social beings. We live in a community. So ask for help, ask for advice, because if you're going through it, someone else have. Don't be embarrassed. What's the worst thing? People can say no. Who cares if somebody judges you? So it's very important. Just try to get a second opinion, or if I'm stuck or if something happened.
Right.
I would also say, in terms of the social media, that stuff never goes away. So anything you say online, any email you write, any text message you write, you basically have to assume, even though we have privacy rights and this, that, and the other, it may show up somewhere. Be very careful how you express yourself. Be very careful what you engage in. Like, just make sure that who are you, who is the person you want the world to see, and be mindful of that.
Great advice. I watched the documentary. I didn't see you in it. Were you asked to be a part of it, or did you decline?
No, so here is what happened. I was on the list of people that they said they had like locked in, but I was never asked to be in the documentary. And part of it is probably because I declined to be part of the 30/30 podcast, which basically, to me, the documentary was just visual cut of a lot of the stuff that was already said. And for me personally, every story, like whether it was the Nightline, 60 Minutes, all of that stuff, like they always reached out to me, and I always felt that one day I will have an opportunity to tell my story on my own terms. I didn't want to be necessarily editorialized. I'm working on a book right now. Like, I have the book in Europe, and then I'm working on a book in the US. For me, increasingly, I'm really focused on trying to be mindful, kind, and live in the present moment. I personally definitely use hot yoga as my tool to be more present, and I have become aware of the fact that I haven't done a great job of living in the present moment through my yoga practice.
Well, I think that a book will be great because you have a lot to say. And I think a lot of women will identify with your journey. And there's a lot, that we can all learn from it. So I thank you for talking to me today. I want all the listeners to let us know your thoughts. If you have any questions for Petra.
Every day you wake up as an entrepreneur, like you have to motivate yourself and you have to motivate a lot of other people, and you are not allowed to have that bad day.
Absolutely. That
Oh,
is truer words were never spoken. I definitely know that for myself. How can people reach you, Petra, and learn more about Sweat and Glow?
my email is Petra at SweatNGlow. That's like the word sweat, the letter N, glow, GLOW.com. Please email me anytime. I'm on Instagram. Sweat and Glow is on Instagram at Sweat and Glow. My personal Instagram is at Petra Smeltzer, like seltzer with an M.
Well, Petra, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
I'm Evelyn Brooks, and you've been listening to Built by a Boss. I hope you enjoyed the show. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite place. If you like what you heard today, please consider giving us a 5-star review and a comment. You can also follow us on Instagram at Built by a Boss, visit our website, and join our private Built by a Boss Facebook group to learn more about our guests and connect with listeners just like you.